Middle Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.
Welcome to Straight Talk, a current affairs show covering a wide array of topics, from societal matters to religious issues, from political injustice to economic subjugation, and much more. We say it as it is and let you speak your mind. Join in the discussion as we proceed with this evening's Straight Talk with your host, Kamal Hussein.
First of all, can you explain to what extent Western societies are affected by Islamophobia and hate crimes against Muslims?
Sure. Jazakallah khair, brother, for inviting me on. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all your listeners as well. This problem of Islamophobia and hate crimes against Muslims is actually a very significant problem within many Western states, not just Britain, but also the US and various European states and also Australia. It's a rising problem. It's an increasing problem. Last year, there was an interesting report issued by the Islamic Human Rights Commission, which basically surveyed Muslims across the country and found that over half of the people who responded had been victims of a hate crime. It also said that 60% of those surveyed had seen an incident of abuse or discrimination. After the Paris attacks, in one report that was submitted to the government, it showed a 300% surge in hate crimes against Muslims. In London, it tripled, basically, 76 incidents in London every single week following the Paris attacks. So this is a significant problem. In the US, the Council on American Islamic Relations said it's never been so bad, the issue of Islamophobia and hate crimes, hate attacks against Muslims. So this is a real problem, and I think we need to understand what is fueling these issues. I mean, we have examples of verbal abuse, people being spat at, hijabs being pulled off. You have attempted murder of Muslims, firebombing of mosques, as well as arson attacks on homes. But there's something that is fueling this increase and this intensity of these crimes, which is the fact that Islamophobia has become mainstream within many Western states. It's entered and become normalized within the political discussions, the political circles, and the media. Today, it's no longer seen as strange for politicians to openly demonize and attack Muslims, whether it's Donald Trump in the U.S. talking about the banning of all Muslims coming into the U.S., or the other Republican candidate, Ben Carson, talking about Syrian refugees as being like, rabid dogs, or the kind of speech from Cameron and his likes here, where, the link between Muslim women not speaking English and radicalization, or the attack on the niqab, or the issue of separating men and women in Islam, all of these things are fueling this climate. And I think real questions need to be asked about a system that has allowed the mainstreaming of Islamophobia within its societies. And not just allowed it, has allowed it to flourish. You have today organizations such as Pegida, in Europe, an organization specifically set up against the so-called Islamicization of the West. These are allowed to operate openly, and they've had thousands attending their protests. And these are fueling, the kind of hate within the Western societies. So this is unfortunately the current situation affecting Muslims within the West, and it's a difficult time for us, and it's a time where we need to be strong, inshallah, as Muslims.
Jazakallah khair. Obviously, you've touched on the Muslim women and their dress code, niqab. Obviously, there is definitely a stereotype of Muslim women especially. So how do you think that the Muslim woman in particular is affected by Islamophobia? Because we hear a lot on newspaper, on radio, on television shows. There is a specific agenda to attack the Muslim woman's dress code.
That's right. Muslim women are the frontline targets of these attacks. This was actually stated in the report that I mentioned that was submitted to the government about hate crimes, the recent one, that said that there's been a 300% increase. It actually said that the overwhelming majority of victims of these hate crimes were Muslim girls and women aged between the ages of 14 and 45. And these incidents, vary. I mean, myself, I know of sisters who have been physically attacked, who have been called names terrorists, who have been doused with alcohol, many different things. There have been some very public cases as well. I'm sure many of your listeners would have known about them. In the case of a pregnant sister on a bus who faced profanities and a rant from some Islamophobes on the bus, threatening. She was pregnant and threatening to harm her and her baby. We've had incidents in France. One sister in Marseille in France was punched in the face. She was slashed with a box cutter, a blade on her chest. And this was as she was leaving one of the metro stations. You had a case in London where a sister was pushed onto an oncoming train, underground train. Another case in Canada where a Muslim mother was picking up her children, and she was beaten by two men at that time. One man punched her in the stomach, the other one ripped off her hijab. And these are just a few of the incidents, high-profile cases. In Florida, there was a case of a Muslim sister who was, as she was driving away from the mosque, she was chased and shot at as well. And really, this is the kind of situation that Muslim women are facing. And it's a difficult time for us as sisters. Today, you find many of our Muslim sisters are scared to go about the daily routines of life, just going shopping, traveling on the buses, traveling on the trains, going to work, going to university, picking up our kids from school. Unfortunately, this has become the scenario, and this is because Muslim women are directly identified as being Muslim because of their Islamic dress. And again, this is the result of this constant demonization of Islam, the social laws of Islam, the jilbab, the hijab, the niqab, and the other laws that are part of Islam as well, which politicians are engaging in today for various agendas.
Jazakallah khair. So, you must have heard recently even the Ofsted inspector was said the children wear the hijab or the niqab, they might be downrating the schools because during school hours they shouldn't be wearing the niqab, even the teachers, they were saying. So I mean, even the establishment, do you think they are encouraging some kind of demonization of the Muslim community and effectively cornering them, saying, look, it's either our way or the highway? I mean, how do you feel they are helping this?
They're actually not helping it at all. They're actually fueling the whole kind of situation. Ofsted is supposed to be an independent organization, and yet in recent times it's very much become politicized and the extended political arm, I think, of the government and its agenda towards Muslims. To get them, as part of this kind of environment of fear, this politics of fear, which is pressuring Muslims to leave some of their Islamic beliefs and values and practices. I mean, it's absurd, this idea that wearing niqab affects the process of teaching and process of learning. Even the National Union of Teachers has opposed this idea. Where's the evidence? Where's the empirical evidence? It seems that today you could just claim anything and get away with it. I think Ofsted, rather than the niqab preventing children from learning, it's actually Ofsted and many of the government agendas in schools, which is preventing a lot of children, Muslim children specifically, from learning. They've been monitored, they've been isolated, they've been marginalized. Sure. And this is creating fear. Muslim kids are scared of engaging in discussions. It's this which is actually affecting the learning process within schools, not a face film.
Jazakallah khair. I've got another question for you. Some argue that Muslims and Islam are responsible for the rising suspicion and hatred towards Islam because of acts of terrorism that are committed by Muslims and not condemned enough by Muslim communities in the West. Or crimes such as the Rochdale, Oxford and Rotherham sex grooming rings, where many of the perpetrators were Muslims, or the assaults on women in Cologne, where the officials said that Arab migrants were most of the attackers. What would you say to this?
Look, criminal acts are committed by people of all races, all beliefs, all colors, all backgrounds, religions. We know this. The problem is when you make those actions committed by individuals an issue of race or religion. And this is what fuels racism, and it's what fuels Islamophobia as well. You see a real double standards in the way that the media and politicians address these criminal acts. For example, you had Dylan Roof, the man who shot dead a number of black worshippers in Charleston, U.S., in a church. But the reaction, there was no hysteria that white terrorism was taking over America or was causing a problem there. You had, obviously, the grooming cases in Rochdale, Rotherham, Oxford, and so on. And yes, a number of the perpetrators were unfortunately Muslim. But you have a paedophile ring which operated in Westminster. Again, you don't have this idea that being a politician makes you somehow a potential child abuser. It's not discussed in this way. Whereas at that time, it was insinuated that there was something inherent within Pakistani culture or Muslim culture or Muslims that made white girls vulnerable to being groomed. And similarly with the Cologne attacks as well, the assaults on women on New Year's Eve. The media covered it as if there was something, again, inherent within Islamic culture that made men prey on white women. But, you find in Germany itself, according to German official figures, a half of working women face sexual harassment in Germany. In many of these yearly conferences, like you have the Munich Oktoberfest, and you have, even in London, the Notting Hill Carnival, harassment and rape of women is actually an annual occurrence in these so-called festivals. Assaults against women is endemic within Western states. A couple of years ago, a European Commission, they said that 1 in 3 women face some kind of violence, sexual violence or physical violence in the European countries, and yet it's not discussed in this way. So the making criminal acts a racial or religious issue is what actually fuels these problems. And the other thing that fuels Islamophobia is the exploitation of these crimes by politicians for political agendas. And I think this is the really dangerous path that the government is leading, which is associating these actions such as terrorism or assaults on women or grooming to particular Islamic social and political beliefs, whether it's dress code, whether it's the separation of men and women, whether it's the advocating of Sharia, conflating these actions to these beliefs. And this is a ridiculous argument, and it's something that as Muslims we need to counter, this narrative, this false narrative, which has its roots in a neocon background, neocon organizations. So I think this is what fuels Islamophobia, not these acts themselves. These acts are committed by people of many different races and beliefs.
Jazakallah khair. I've got another question for you. Some say that to address Islamophobia, Muslims in the West need to become more integrated into the societies they live. What do you think about this? Do you think we should integrate?
I think the issue here is, I think the underlying argument of this kind of claim is that it's something to do with the values of Islam that leads to the issue of Islamophobia. And I think that's a really dangerous argument, and it's an absurd argument which essentially justifies or gives excuses to those individuals who are committing these hate crimes. It's absurd. It's as absurd as claiming that the Jews who were persecuted at the time of by the fascists in Germany, there was a problem within Jewish culture that led them to be persecuted. It's as absurd as that kind of argument and as dangerous as that kind of argument. How can people say that the way that I dress or a Muslim sister dresses, the fact that, Muslims have particular social laws, it's these things which are to blame for attacks against them. And this is ridiculous. The fact that Muslims speak out against attacks on their Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the fact that Muslims speak out for their ummah and the oppression they're facing against oppressive rulers, it's absolutely absurd to claim that those kind of beliefs are a danger to society. How can speaking for justice and against oppression be a danger to society? How can the way that a sister dresses according to a religious belief be a danger to society? This is an absurd argument. But the other important thing to understand is, what do you mean by integration? We're not talking here about learning English. Cameron may be trying to peddle a particular narrative that integration is just about learning English or engaging more in society. This is not the case. The integration agenda of the government is specifically to do with Muslims leaving their Islamic practices and their Islamic beliefs. Being quiet about Western foreign policy, neglecting the Islamic dress, leaving particular political views, for example, supporting Islamic rule in the Muslim world. This is what integration is about. It's about creating a Muslim who is stripped, essentially, of most of their Islamic beliefs, so that nothing is left but a skeleton of their Islamic beliefs. And as Muslims, we cannot accept this agenda. We are part of society. We don't isolate ourselves from society. We engage, and we should engage with the people non-Muslims that we are in contact with. But this does not mean leaving our Islamic values aside. In fact, it's the Islamic values that makes us better citizens within the society. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, in Surah Baqarah, gives a very nice verse that is a reminder to us, I think, as Muslims in the West, about how to respond to this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Never will the Jews or the Christians be pleased with you, O Muhammad, till you follow their religion. Say, verily, the guidance of Allah, that is the only guidance. And if you were to follow their desires after what you have received knowledge, i.e. the Quran, then you would have against Allah neither any wali, protector, any guardian, nor any helper." So as Muslims, we actually need to be very strong at this time and understand clearly that this is not about just learning English and engaging more in society. This is specifically an integration agenda of assimilation to basically remove particular beliefs from us and practices from us.
Jazakallah khair. The final question I have for you is, how do you feel Muslims in the West should respond to the rising level of Islamophobia affecting the societies they live in? This is a very important question because, unfortunately, there's a lot of Muslims who, the way the media has played this politics of fear, are afraid to talk or speak the truth. And even I have noticed myself in a lot of the masjids and the Islamic institutions that they're completely silenced, unfortunately. So how do you think they should respond?
Sure. I think there's 3 points, brother, in terms of this. The first one is, like you mentioned, this climate of fear that really as Muslims we should not be intimidated by this politics of fear. Rather, we need to be strong at this time. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that let not any one of you belittle himself. And so the people asked, O Messenger of Allah, how can we belittle ourselves or himself? The Prophet ﷺ said that he finds a matter concerning Allah about which he should say something, and he does not say it. So Allah says to him on the day of resurrection, what prevented you from saying something about such and such and such and such? And he says, it was out of fear of the people. Then Allah will say, rather, it's I who you should have more properly feared. So that's the first thing, that we need to really, inshallah, overcome silence due to this environment of fear and not be intimidated to leaving our beliefs because of this. Second thing we need to realize as Muslims is that this is inevitable for us, really. This test and this battle between haqq and batil is inevitable for us as Muslims. And rather than being surprised by it, we should actually know and understand that it was coming. There's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, again, may inshallah give us motivation for this. He said that after you, he's talking to the Sahaba, after you, there are going to be days of patience. And the patience during that time is like the one clutching onto a hot coal. During these days, the reward for the one who adheres to the commands of Allah will be equivalent to the reward of 50 men who did an action like this. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling us of the time where holding on to the deen will be like this, holding on to a hot piece of coal. But the reward is multiple for us, inshallah, at this time. And we should be like the ones Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran, when, the Confederates, when people said, look, you should fear these people. And it increased their iman, it increased their submissiveness. So this is the second point, brother, that we should understand that the tests are here. The way we respond, if we hold on to Islam tightly, then inshallah the cool breeze of Jannah will be for us, inshallah. In the Akhirah.
Inshallah.
And the third point, brother, is importantly, we need to not be silent to the demonization of Islam. And we need to counter the narrative that there's some kind of association between Islamic social and political beliefs and terrorism. We need to challenge that. We need to show what the true causes of these acts of terror are. And we need to counter the demonization of the Islamic rules as well, whether it's to do with the dress code or niqab or the separation of men and women or polygamy or the jilbab or jihad or sharia or the caliphate. We need to, at this time, not separate ourselves from the non-Muslims but engage more and break down the lies and show the truth of it and the truth of the position of women in Islam, the justice of Islam, the economy of Islam, the nature of it serving humanity. We need to engage in these discussions now. And inshallah, you know, there's a lot of reward for doing this, for engaging it. And inshallah, we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps us strong and determined at this time to do that.
Ameen. Once again, sister, Jazakallah khair for joining us, inshallah. Very motivational reminder, inshallah. May Allah reward you for joining us. And inshallah, I pray that you can join us next time in our show. So Jazakallah khair for giving your time to come on to the show. Assalamu alaikum. Barakallahu.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair. Dear listeners, just to remind you that you can call in on 07477 080 and you can also text us with your questions, comments and anything that the sister discusses. Well, you can give us your suggestions and your comments on that, inshallah. In the studio, I have two special guests as well, inshallah. I have brother Wakil Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam.
And I have Abdus Samad. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah khair for joining us, brothers, once again. Brother Wakil, as you saw the sister, as you heard the sister talking a lot about Islamophobia, and she touched upon the unprecedented rise of Islamophobia in the West, and especially living in Britain. We have suffered. We are suffering as a result of that. If you see, she touched upon how our sisters are being, demonized in many different ways.
Actually, can we take a text? I mean, there's a couple of texts which is related to this. So here's one. Salam. Some sisters and their family are terrified of the current reality. What advice would you give to the sisters? And the other one is also, I think it's the same, along similar lines. Only today there was a sister who got attacked by two girls. They pulled her hijab and hit her with a bottle. She reported this to the police. What else can she do? How can Muslim women protect themselves? So it's a very similar sort of question.
If you can answer this question for the listener.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Jazakallah khair for inviting me on your show. It's always a pleasure to be here. Let's just take a step back, perhaps, and try and understand what is Islamophobia. And if we sort of take a step back and try and define what is phobia, we note that phobia in general is a strong, unreasonable fear or hatred of something. In other words, that fear is unreasonable and it has no substance, no justifiable cause. And therefore, by extension, Islamophobia is essentially founded on an irrational, unfounded basis. And therefore, we Muslims need to expose that. Now, I've heard Dr Nasreen Nawaz and she has been very enlightening. I just want to go back a bit. When we see, Holocaust that was commemorated just this week, you had the Holocaust Memorial Day. Unfortunately, millions of Jews were killed by the Germans, by the Nazis. But that did not happen overnight.
Sure.
In fact, the decades preceding the Holocaust was actually characterized by vilification and demonization of Jews. And Muslims are not responsible for the Holocaust. Muslims are not responsible for Benito Mussolini in Italy killing his opponents. It is, the Europeans who have blood on their hands, unfortunately. Now, why am I talking about the Holocaust? Is because in a very similar fashion, Islamophobia seems to be attacking Muslims and Islam, and a certain picture has been built. And I want to go back in particular to 9/11 and the aftermath of 9/11. If we look at 9/11 and you look at the media narrative since 9/11 and the narrative that is being presented by politicians, one thing you can see very clearly is that there is a very sustained attack on Muslims, on Islam, and that is a systematic demonization of the Muslim community. Muslims are being dehumanized in the eyes of the general public across Europe and America. Sister Nasreen Nawaz talked about Donald Trump. It's been said that Donald Trump has made Islamophobia a mainstream phenomenon by him calling for Muslims to be banned from America. That essentially says the US presidential election is now founded to an extent on Islamophobia. And it is unfortunate that he seems to be leading the Republican camp. But the point, I'm not particularly interested in Donald Trump's success or failure, but what I am interested in is how the world population is accepting, essentially legitimizing attack on Muslims across the globe. And that is what I'm saying. It is becoming, unfortunately, a mainstream phenomenon, and that is deeply concerning.
But at the same time, would you not say that the way the Muslims are being demonized, we don't find the same thing happening to the Hindu community or the Christian community or the other other religious communities? Why is that the case? Because you raised Donald Trump, that's why I'm asking that question. Because why did he just specifically target the Muslims?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, and I think our listeners perhaps need to look at this from, I suppose, what I would call from an ideological perspective. And what do I mean by that? By this, I mean a scenario where the West is facing an opposing way of life, which is a real or a potential threat to the Western way of life, the Western thought, the Western way of thinking, the Western way of living. Now, we know, those of us who are a bit older will remember the Cold War. You had the Soviet Union and the West, the capitalist bloc, was fighting tooth and nail against the communist bloc. Now, late 80s, obviously, communism disappeared, the Soviet Union collapsed, and since then, they have made Islam the bogeyman. They have replaced Islam because they have replaced communism with Islam. And the Western politicians, Western media outlets have now found a new enemy. Now, we know in Europe, they thrive on this perceived threat. They need these threats so that they can sustain their way, the way they do politics. And I would say it is not Islam's fault or the Muslims' fault that we find ourselves under sustained attack. In fact, I would say it is the very Western politicians who preach liberty, who preach freedom, who preach equality, yet they actively pass laws which discriminate against Muslims, dehumanize Muslims, and in worst case scenario, imprison Muslims who seem to hold different views. So to come back to your point, I would say it is not the fault of Muslims that we find ourselves in this current siege. I would say if we look at the history of Europe, Europe has always fought an opposing way of life, be it the Jews in the 30s and the 20s, which led to the Holocaust, be it before that, if you want to go back to the Great Game where the British were fighting the Germans and the Japanese. So I think to those who suggest that actually it's almost, if I'd use the word fault loosely, it's almost the fault of Muslims that now they're under attack by politicians in the West. No, I would say it is actually the Western way of life that actively seeks out an opponent so that it can essentially justify its way of life in that way.
Jazakallah khair. So what you're essentially saying is that Islam is the only other ideological alternative which effectively is a threat to the Western way of life.
Precisely, yeah.
Because the other religions, unfortunately, can live side by side with the Western societies, and they don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, this is again. I'll use the word religion rather loosely. This isn't. I mean, capitalism and the Western way of life doesn't have a problem with you praying in your mosque. What they have problem with is your refusal to bow down to their economic policy, your refusal to bow down to their godless politics. Capitalism and liberal values, they do not want a system in which Muslims say, actually, we want to be abiding by divine laws. That runs contrary to what Western liberal way of life stands for. So what I am saying is, Hinduism obviously doesn't have a problem with that, because Hinduism can coexist under a liberal system. Islam, on the other hand, cannot coexist under a liberal system, because Islam has its own philosophy on life, it has its own laws, it has its own rules, and so it is essentially facing an opposing system and way of life.
Jazakallah khair. I think, Brother Wakil, if you could just go back to the text again. I think we need to answer that question.
The text was basically, do you have any particular advice for sisters? Because it seems like the sisters are the most vulnerable, and they are actually being targeted because they're
just been a victim of an attack today, so, subhanAllah.
I mean, do we have any advice for them?
I mean, we've got to take... First and foremost, we are a community, and I think as a community, I'm married, I have wife, I have children. So as a community, we of course need to come together and help each other out. Now, of course, there will be, as you say rightly, the statistics show that Muslim women face the attack because they are vulnerable section of society. Where they face such attacks, I would say they need to definitely go to the police, and they do need to report those matters. After all, Muslims do not need to be vigilante groups and do counteraction. What I would say is, of course, they need to seek the protection from the police. But I think this need not be left just to the police, because as a community, mashallah, we do have now very established institutions. As Muslims, we do have established. We have an established community, and so if we come together as a community and stand out as a block, we can face such attacks. This isn't about cowering down. It is about because as I started off by saying, Islamophobia is an unreasonable and irrational fear of Islam. So as a community, we need to counter that unreasonableness, and we need to counter that irrationality by portraying that Islam is actually, in fact, a force for good for this society. Islam did not come to as it is being portrayed, unfortunately. Islam is not here to destroy society, destroy life and limb. In fact, Islam can be the remedy for many of the ills which this society faces in this very day.
Jazakallah khair. Abdus Samad, do you want to add in?
I would advise the sisters to be, a bit more vigilant, and maybe try to avoid, certain parts, certain areas that they feel that may not be safe, and maybe to be in the company of other people as well at any time. Just take precautions. Really, other than that, really, there's not that much you can do, isn't it?
Jazakallah khair.
Unfortunately, that's the reality.
Yeah, subhanallah. We've just heard this from the sister, the text, and here you have, unfortunately, some Muslims immediately when they see something on TV or something on the radio or even in the newspaper, they are so eager to become apologetic and apologize. Do you think we should be an apologetic community, Brother Abdus Samad?
No, I don't think. Actually, just today I was in for Jummah, listening to the khutbah, and it's a little bit sad in a way, because what I find is that sometimes we start blaming ourselves, So I was talking to a person about a couple of weeks back, and just discussing this issue of Islamophobia and things like this, and he quickly sort of said, well, what do you expect? Look what some Muslims are doing, and look how they're behaving, and look, even from Bradford, you had this many people. They flew out to Syria. What's going on? So I mean, this type of thinking is very dangerous. Actually, it's harmful for the Muslim community. It's demoralizing, and it seeks to blame the community, as the government is doing. Do you see? What we need to realize is that the Muslim people globally are being brutalized. We find that the Muslim world is under occupation, continuously being bombed, governments are brought down, instability created, all these things, and as a result, you should expect, a people to respond. Now, this response can happen all sorts of ways. Every individual has their own mind, and they're going to respond. And they're not necessarily looking at Islam. They're not necessarily looking to the mosque for guidance. They're
frustrated.
They're frustrated. That's how it is. To be quite honest, I find that the Muslims have actually, they responded very well compared to any other people. I mean, if you look at in the US, for example, the way the black people are treated, you find riots take place very quickly. Very quickly people come onto the streets and they start, breaking down shops and and businesses and they create a chaos. But look at the Muslims. Considering the sort of brutality that the Muslims are facing, with the rise by, 300%, a rise in Islamophobia. Look how civilized, look how decent the Muslims are.
That is a very good point.
So this odd individual who may be frustrated, for whatever reason, who may, act independently, you can't blame the Muslim community or Islam for this. If anything, it is the Muslims who are, well behaved, and they're discouraging this sort of behavior and whatnot.
So I was just going to come back to you because you made a very good point about how other communities respond. If you look at in 2011, the incident in Tottenham, Mark Duggan, then the way the black people responded, they had riots across the streets of London. Now, I mean, compared to that, the Muslim community is nothing like that. I mean, but
I just want to come in. I mean, just when I perhaps give two examples. In 2001, after 9/11, when George W. Bush called his war on terror and he said, we will launch a crusade, we did not see the Christian world, the so-called Christian world, say, oh, we're really sorry, this nutcase clearly has lost his marbles, and look what he's using very inflammatory language. So we did not see an unreserved apology from the Western world. I mean, obviously they're not really Christian world, but I'm just using it as a kind of a term that people use often.
Sure.
Then if you look at similarly, I mean, of course you can have your own examples. If you look at the incident in Norway a couple of years ago when Anders Breivik, when he killed,
I remember that
he killed 77 people,
absolutely.
He sprayed with bullets those individuals. Unfortunately, we didn't hear apology from Christians. In fact, he was actually a right-wing Christian. But we did not hear Christians coming out in public to say, we condemn this guy, we apologize unreservedly. So,
and plus his religion wasn't highlighted
absolutely,
at the time.
Far from it. They just said this guy's a bit of a lunatic. So the point I'm making is, you've got example after example where you've got, if an incident happens at the hand of a so-called Christian or an atheist, nobody says, oh, by the way, everyone else needs to apologize. Nobody has to date apologized for the historic sex allegations that we're seeing in Britain. And so, we know that politicians and highly placed, powerful individuals were involved with all of this. The historic sex scandal. No one's apologizing for this. So why should the average Muslim apologize for incidents? And one could say, the odd criminal behavior by isolated Muslims. Why should the entire Muslim community apologize for that? Surely the entire Muslim community cannot be tarnished with due to the acts of few individuals.
Jazakallah khair. Just before I come back to you, Brother Samad, I've just got an announcement for the listeners. Listeners on YouTube are facing sound issues. Sadly, it's out of our hands. Please tune in via the Mix LR, types Middle Path Radio. Also, links are on our Twitter page at Middle Path Radio. Thank you very much. Yeah, Brother Abdul Samad, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, the point I wanted to add is that I think we as a community, when we keep talking about coming together and forming this block and whatnot, and work together, I think we need to work on a very unison position, like a position that we can really be clear upon and stick by it. And be very clear. And this position should be that we have nothing to apologize about. And we need to be very clear where the problem is. The problem is with Western brutality globally, where it's trying to dominate the entire globe through secularism and capitalism, which is very much resisted in the Muslim world. It should not interfere in the Muslim world. And at the same time, Muslims living here in the West, we have every right to criticize, to condemn even some of the actions that they are committing across the globe. And the fact of the matter is, this Islamophobia is on the rise, and it unfortunately, to me, it seems like this is how it's going to be for a very long time. And this is a part of the test, inshallah, and we need to remain firm on our Islamic position. We need to convey the da'wah to the people and to the wider society as well. And the good thing is there are a lot of non-Muslims who are very sane. I mean, even today I was just reading, like if you read The Independent and The Guardian, normally they do publish some very good articles where they really do expose. And maybe we should learn from these things. They expose the hypocrisy and the double standards of Cameron and other sort of like Western politicians.
Jazakallah khair. Just a reminder to our listeners once again, please do not forget to call in on 07477080248, and you can also text us to have your say. Please call in to, or text us and raise your concern, any questions you have, any comments or any concerns you may have about this topic that we're discussing today. And I've just got a text from one listener. And this is for Brother Wakil. Donald Trump and David Cameron are constantly fueling Islamophobia. What can Muslim community do to expose this, and how should mosques and our Muslim leaders react? I think that's a very good question.
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you to the listener. As I said, Islamophobia has become a global phenomenon. So I've got several segments to my answer. Firstly, we have to look at how inactive the Muslim rulers were. When Donald Trump said, we should ban Muslims from entering the US, I did not, and unless I was missing something, I did not see a single Muslim ruler who condemned Donald Trump.
Subhanallah.
Unfortunately, nobody came to the aid of those Muslims who were prevented from entering the US. I mean,
there were some Muslims from this country who wanted to go at a similar time after the announcement, but they couldn't go.
They couldn't. I mean, I know that 500,000 people signed a petition to say Donald Trump should be banned from the UK. I mean, that to me, I found that quite encouraging. It's nice. I mean, I'm sure those 500,000 were not Muslims alone. I'm sure a lot of them were non-Muslim. Maybe the majority of them were non-Muslims.
But you know where that's going to go, isn't it?
I mean, of course, it's not going to happen. But the point I'm making is, when the likes of Donald Trump or David Cameron, when they say these outrageous comments, when they say Muslim women need to learn English so that they can prevent radicalization,
or they'll be deported back to their country.
This is just as ridiculous as saying, all the Christians now need to give up their Christian faith. I mean, what kind of comment is that? How does learning English have anything? What does that have anything to do with radicalization? So the point I was making is that Muslim rulers have been silent, and unfortunately that's something the Muslim Ummah need to take note of. Okay. Secondly, how should Muslims respond? Let's look at David Cameron. David Cameron, together with his neoconservative friends such as Michael, William Wilshaw and Michael Shawcross and these guys from Ofsted and from the Charities Commission and Michael Gove and the other friends that he has who are running the government these days, Muslims need to face up to these individuals, because we've got two options. Either we take the intellectual onslaught and give up Islam, or we face up to it. Now, I know most of the Muslim listeners will say, no, we need to face up to it, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed Islam. It is the haqq, it is the truth, and He has left it. He has entrusted this to us. Now, this is an amana. If we fail in protecting Islam for the next generation, then our children will give up Islam. That means nobody will worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these lands. And that is not a dramatization of the reality. That is a potential reality. So I say, when we face these ongoing, systematic intellectual onslaught on Islam, we need to, rise above that. We need to, let's remember, not all non-Muslims hate Islam. We need to call a spade a spade. Sure. Most non-Muslims actually are just getting on with their daily life. Yes, of course, a lot of them are being manipulated by the likes of Daily Mail. Because of the propaganda they get from the media. Absolutely. I mean, the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Times, the Daily Telegraph, the right-wing media I'm referring to. Sure. They benefit from this. Absolutely. And so, unfortunately, their readers are adversely affected by this propaganda. Yeah. And it is a propaganda war. But what I'm saying is... Because they're not seeing the other side of the story. Absolutely, they're not. There isn't the media promoting Islam, for example, and unfortunately. You can't blame the average Joe in the street, unfortunately. So what I am saying is we Muslims have to rise above that, and we must speak up and portray the true image of Islam. And, these days, Muslims are facing binary choices. Oh, do you support terrorism, or, do you condemn terrorism? Hang on, why do we have to support terrorism, or why do we have to condemn terrorism? I mean, what kind of a choice is that? As Muslims, we need to explain the context. We need to obviously have a good understanding of Islam. We need to then understand, how to do dawah of Islam in an eloquent way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered us that we convey Islam in an eloquent way, and we must do just that. Jazakallah khair. Brother Abdul Samad, as you've already said, and sister was also saying that, and I also touched upon it before, that the Muslims are afraid. Yeah, they're afraid about their positions, especially in the mosque. These days, khutbahs are, unfortunately, in the mosque are very, very boring, unfortunately. Quite depressing, some of them. And depressing sometimes. Mm-hmm. Because they're not touching upon or discussing important matters purely because of the apprehensiveness that they may be arrested, they may be taken. Now, Sister Nasreen touched on this, and mashallah, she gave some motivation. What kind of advice would you give? I think it's this fear that really then turns these people onto their community, and then they start looking for problem and issues that they pick on, and then they start blaming as well. It's very sad to say it, but this is the trouble. We found that and this is why I look at Malcolm X, for example, and to me he was a great leader, because he really understood the issues. There are self-hating Muslims, you can say. Yes. There are self-hating Muslims, and as soon as anything comes out from these likes of Cameron, they will. Instead of really questioning this and taking on that challenge and giving an alternative narrative to this whole sort of created whatever you want to call it, they start looking at the community and they start blaming the community. And say, oh, it's because we don't have knowledge of Islam, and some of us we do the wrong things and all the rest of it. And to me it seems like this is the easy way out. And this is it is, and this is a sign of cowardice, and this is not really a sign of leadership and strength. And really, after all, who should we be afraid of? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Exactly. And this is what the sister said, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. أَتَخْشَوْنَهُمْ فَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن تَخْشَوْهُ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Do you fear them? Allah has greater right that you should fear Him. Subhanallah. So we should fear Allah, and we should stick firm to our deen, and we should continue to spread the message of Islam
despite the situation, whatever difficulty comes in our way, this is what Allah and His messengers promised us. And these are difficulties, trials that we will face, and we shouldn't start blaming the Muslim community. You know, we have a beautiful message for the society, and we should go out there and spread this message to the wider society. And there are a lot of people that will be receptive to this message. And we need to remain firm.
Jazakallah khair, Abdul Samad. We have a lot of text messages coming through, but obviously I won't be able to go through all of them. I'm just going to select one of them. It says, Jazakallah khair, brothers, for discussing this very important topic. There are many non-Muslims who can see the incorrectness of Islamophobia and speak out against such attacks. How should we present this topic to those non-Muslims? Can we work together on something with them? Brother Wakil, can you answer this one,
Thank
please?
you. Yes, I think I touched on this earlier. In my experience, that I used to do sort of street dawah in the past, where I would set up stall and discuss with your average Joe in the street.
And would be non-Muslims as well.
Non-Muslims, yeah, absolutely. And actually, most of them were non-Muslims. And what I found was that they were very reasonable, some of them. They understood how twisted the media was, and they understood the propaganda, and they understood that obviously bad news sells, good news doesn't sell. So they understood, that the media position often is unjustified. Of course, as I said, some people do get manipulated by that news, and they carry on attacking the Muslims. So in terms of how we need to respond, I think we must first and foremost.
The question was about, can we work together with the non-Muslims?
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of right-thinking non-Muslims out there. Good, educated non-Muslims who are very balanced, very open, and they can see that Muslims are being used by mainstream politicians to win elections. They know there's a political agenda. Today, the politician who attacks the Muslims most gets the vote. Unfortunately, that's the sad reality. Whether it's the far right in France or the likes of Nigel Farage here, or you can say a lot of the Tory MPs who, Cameron included, who attack Muslims so that they can deflect real issues. You have, I digress slightly, but you have a capitalist economy which is on its knees. Despite all the they're saying there's a lot of green shoots. In the sense that the economy is improving. But we know that the Western economy is actually on its knees. And instead of discussing those real crippling issues, these are structural issues which are affecting their societies.
So effectively, these are red herring to divert.
They're diverting attention by attacking Islam and Muslims. Now, in that scenario, we do need to discuss with the right-thinking non-Muslims. We need to reach out to them. We need to, you don't reciprocate vile speech with vile speech. Yeah, that's not how Rasulullah Islam taught us. When Rasulullah Islam faced vile speech from the Quraysh, he would not reciprocate. In fact, he would do the opposite. He would be beautiful. He would preach to them beautifully. And so, in that sense, I would say we do need to work together with those non-Muslims who are willing to come and work with us. Now, of course, by that, I don't mean we then compromise Islam and, to achieve a good aim, we then say, well, actually, I'll compromise Islam because I have a better objective. No. By that, I mean, we need to hold on to Islam. Yes, we cooperate with non-Muslims. Rasulullah Islam cooperated with many of the non-Muslims in Mecca.
Maybe they will become Muslim one day, because this is what Abu Bakr said, that don't antagonize these non-Muslims, because one day these non-Muslims will maybe be on your side working with you. They will be your brothers. And
precisely. And I think for that reason, we need to have compassion when we discuss with non-Muslims. Most non-Muslims, they're decent people, and we need to be compassionate. Yes, we sympathize with the fact that they haven't accepted Islam, and we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah guides them. Yes, and we don't, we're not here to be antagonistic or hold an enmity against them. In my view, we should be compassionate. Rasulullah Islam cried when he saw a Jewish person die, and he cried, and the Sahaba said, "O Prophet of Allah, why are you crying? A Jew has died." And he said, "Yes, I'm crying because isn't it another soul that I just missed? That's another soul that's passed by my hands, and I could not give dawah to him." So the Prophet ﷺ cried not out of enmity, but out of compassion. And what does Islam teach us? It teaches us that we need to be compassionate to our fellow non-Muslim citizens, and we need to reach out to them, and we need to, inshallah, in a polite way, give da'wah to them.
We have a text here. How do we fight Islamophobia without looking like ISIS supporter?
That's an interesting point.
I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, he has, firstly, he has sent Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam to give us the way of, and to show how to interact with society. Now, you've got ISIS, and to be honest, I very much often question myself who is funding, supporting, and sustaining ISIS.
So effectively, you can't really comment on
them.
You haven't met them.
Absolutely.
So you don't know.
I don't know who these ISIS are.
We can't believe in the propaganda machine.
Absolutely. I don't believe the mainstream media, because I know, if history shows anything, it shows that they, as they said in those days, the attack on Iraq was essentially built on a sexed up dossier, yeah? So the point I'm making is, you've got media outlets who lie. They lie openly. So I'm not going to trust what they say. But what I can comment on is that Islam doesn't teach us to be violent. It doesn't teach us to kill innocent civilians. In fact, Islam teaches us to be merciful to them. So you can oppose Islamophobia through your intellectual discourse. Islam has given us deep ideas. Islam rises above attacks, and didn't Prophet ﷺ face attacks?
Exactly. I was just going to say he was being attacked and vilified constantly,
and he didn't reciprocate. In fact, one thing he did was he returned with a smile. Yeah. What did Isa ﷺ show us? Isa ﷺ didn't show us that he didn't say, "Oh, well, I'll be violent with those people." Isa ﷺ was, he was polite and compassionate. Merciful. He was compassionate towards the people who were attacking him. So prophets after prophets have shown us that you do not go to the low level of those who attack you. In fact, you reach out to them and you explain to them, and inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward us, because who said it is beyond Allah to sort out this mess? If Allah wishes to sort it all out, then of course Allah could do that, but He's left it to us. He's testing us.
Jazakallah khair, subhanAllah. We've run out of time. We've just got a minute. Just to wrap up, Brother Abdus Samad, if you want to just make a final point.
Yeah, I would say basically, the Muslim community should not fear this situation. I know it's sometimes it's quite overwhelming, and as well, I think we don't necessarily need to really focus too much on Islamophobia as a thing that we need to deal with. Rather, we need to concentrate on spreading the message of Islam, and and start to interact with the wider society, and Islamophobia will expose itself. So I know there's a lot of organizing and concern and things like this amongst some groups within the Muslim community where they're actually trying to fight Islamophobia. But it's not really a fight. It's just in my understanding, it's just something that has occurred as due to a clash of ideology, and the West is shown its aggressive side, whereas we need to remain sort of like calm, and we need to follow Islam and present Islam to the wider society, and that in itself will be the most effective way to deal with Islamophobia.
Jazakallah khair to both of you for joining this show, inshallah, and I hope inshallah in the future you can join inshallah. Us. We've been really fortunate to have you both. Jazakallah khair. Dear listeners, thank you very much for listening to our show. Jazakallah khair once again, and I'm sorry that we couldn't answer a lot of the other questions I had and your comments on the text. So inshallah, maybe next time we will cover some of that. Until next time, inshallah, once again, Jazakallah khair, assalamu alaikum, and see you next week, inshallah.
Middle Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.